Inside each of us are two wolves. One is evil. It is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. One is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. So which wolf will win? The one you feed most. One in 4 people in the world will be affected by mental or neurological disorders at some point in their lives. Around 450 million people currently suffer from such conditions, placing mental disorders among the leading causes of ill health and disability worldwide. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the United States, which is 43.8 million or 18.5%, experiences mental illness in a given year. Approximately 1 in 25 adults in the United States, which is 9.8 million, or 4%, experiences a serious mental illness in a given year that substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activities. Do you know who those people are? Because I didn't.
My name is Gabby Green.
Lecture reporting, what we say we're doing if it happens again? Whoa! That means you're rebounding in the air.
You guys come off these DHOs got it coming downhill into the basket. Some of you were looking out like, oh, the next day.
You know, the first time you met Gabby, the first thing you noticed was that smile that she had. Gabby was funny, charismatic, good person to be around, enjoyable to coach. Just a great kid.
Sweetheart, and just a great person, great kid, real easy to coach, never an attitude, loved by her teammates because of her personality, so she was just a joy.
But beyond anything, she was probably the most kind person I ever knew. Late in Bab's high school year, she started having this anxiety, particularly with basketball. In a very stressful game or something like that, she would start getting this anxiety and feel like she was going to have to throw up and things like that. Those episodes grew more as she grew older, and at some points we took her to the hospital, the emergency room, and the only thing would come up is that her sugar would be really high, and I'm a diabetic. So they thought that maybe she was developing diabetes or in the pre-stages of that. But if you look back now, that was the beginning of what they call a pre-dome, leading up to a major mental illness break. In the end, they diagnosed her with schizoaffective disorder.
Schizoaffective disorder is a pretty complicated diagnosis. It's very similar and related to schizophrenia. It's in the thought disorders and schizophrenia-like section of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual. It's very different in a lot of ways. You do have the same things you have in schizophrenia. You have disorganization, paranoia, things like hallucinations, but the difference is you have discrete periods of time where you have what are called affective symptoms. Those can be depressed mood or elevated mood. People are familiar with elevated mood, such as mania. So to have a diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder, you have to have that discrete period of time, usually at least 2 weeks, that does have the either a very, very depressed mood that's separate from the hallucinations and the disorganization of the schizophrenia, or a mania with more behaviors such as hypersexuality, spending extra money you don't have, and other things that go along with more of a manic type diagnosis.
You know, nobody I think knew when she broke up with Michael Gabel what was going on, because it made absolutely no sense. And I think that was probably the first real break of what people have, you know, explained to me as mania. I think she regretted that the most in her life. She said that to quite a few people, that Michael was the love of her life, and she shouldn't have ever left him. Every time she had her major psychotic episodes, leading up to them, she was very, very manic.
You know, right now, our life expectancy is shorter than it's ever been, specifically because of suicide and overdose. And the fact that we can talk about those things and have them part of a language and something we can understand and not be ashamed of, I think that's where we have to start. Having said that, you can't be naive about the fact that the access to treatment is very challenging, and even the treatment itself is not always easy.
A lot of the medication side effects were just as hard as, or sometimes worse than, the psychosis itself. And yeah, I think that's where the street drugs came in.
We talked about things like self-medication, self-management, which that's certainly an element of it. A lot of things could actually be what we call iatrogenic, meaning that it's maybe a well-meaning family doctor. So I'm a psychiatrist and a family doctor, and in general practice, sometimes we'll use things like sedatives for anxiety, and sometimes those can actually lead to substances of abuse. What's important with addiction is it's not how much you use or how often you use things, it's really what happens to your brain and body when you do use to meet those criteria for a substance use disorder. It's not just, you know, people are trying to seek out relief from, say, hallucinations or something like that. We also know that things like early childhood trauma and environmental factors play a role, and there's the whole old nature versus nurture kind of concept. You know, some people may have a risk for schizoaffective disorder, schizophrenia, or substance use and not develop it based on the fact that they maybe avoid certain things that might trigger symptoms. So it's a very complex answer, but I would say it's not just as simple as self-medication. There are environmental and social and other factors that do play a role.
The loss of her brother was always huge to her, and I don't know that she ever really dealt with it, because on the date of the loss, he died in the beginning of February. Usually y'all were in playoffs, and she didn't have time to think about that, but she had a lot of time to think about it at college there, and she didn't probably have the support structure. I don't know how many of you knew this, but Mr. Bernard would sit for hours sometimes at the chapel with her. She was an amazing woman. So she had structure from basketball. She had friends around her. She had Mr. Bernard there. And she didn't have any of that. She did feel a lot of pressure living in this area. She felt like she could never ever live up to what people thought she should be.
Definitely looked up to Gabby. I viewed her as one of my role models, and I thought that she was always like a sister to me and somebody that I wanted to be like. Every time I stepped on the court, I always played for Gabby, and even though like she wasn't always around, or even though I didn't see her all the time, I always thought, okay, be like Gabby Green, sink the threes, like drive to the basket, like just play like Gabby.
I thought even things were out to get her and her family and her friends and the people she was close to. She saw things she described to me that were terrifying constantly. And she was scared people would think she was crazy.
Those abilities to kind of figure out who needs what, it's a very individualized thing, and that's the challenge. It's like we're trying to figure out ways to have something that's a very individualized sort of problem, but trying to make it fit into a medical model that's not always conducive to those sort of you know, aspects of recovery.
The next morning I woke up like it was time for me to go to work. And I went in and I shook her and I said, "Are you okay? How are you?" And she opened her eyes a little bit at me. And I said, "Do you want to come to work with me today, or do you want to stay here and sleep until Daddy comes and picks you up?" And she just went like this to me. And I said, "Okay, well, I'll come back at lunch and check on you." And she shook her head. And I went and got dressed and went to work. And Mike tells me he went about 10:30 or 11 o'clock and went in and said, "Come on, Gab, get up." And she wasn't breathing. And he started giving her CPR. He, I guess, called when I got there. They were in with her in the room. They didn't want me to be in the house. And I asked Danny, I said, "How long?" He was like 40 minutes, and I knew if she wasn't breathing that long, and she was probably not going to make it. I don't believe that she wanted to die. I don't believe that she knew what was in that bag. I wish everybody else would be a little more careful.
No longer will anything be taken for granted in my days here, because I have seen how perfectly easily a single decision can shatter someone's beautiful life. The tragic story motivated me to live my life to the fullest and give every day all that I can offer. I choose to celebrate and honor her, living out all the parts of life that she should have enjoyed enough to her religion. My goal is to live out all of her dreams and ultimately touch her every single day with her love.
I'm about to go see Gabby's grave for the first time.
It's tired and it's true. Wait for it. It's all she ever knew.
I think that's why I feel so guilty, is because I find myself thinking about that exact moment of how she felt all the time, every day. Every day I think about her. I just want to know how bad it had to have been for her to make those choices and to go that way.
It's all she ever knew.
Until next time, I love you more than you'll ever know. I wish you were here. It wasn't just someone died of a drug overdose. It was someone's daughter died. Someone's best friend was taken. Someone's high school soulmate is now gone. It's so much more than just, oh, another junkie overdosed. It's so much more, and you don't realize that until it happens to you, until you are that person who lost that best friend, until you are that person who doesn't have that person anymore. Will never get the chance to have that person. I thought one day my kids are going to be best friends with Gabby Green's kids. And all of that is like, it's swiped away from you. It's taken. And I can't even imagine how losing a child would ever feel for Marguerite. Oh, I just can't even imagine how it feels. It's so much more than just someone died of a drug overdose. It's so much more than that.
The story of the two wolves is a teaching that Gabby reflected on a lot. She loved how it taught that there's a constant battle between good versus evil. Marguerite shared this with me a few months back when I was trying to find the answers as to what happened to Gab. It just didn't make sense to me then how my best friend, my soulmate, is no longer here. It pains me to think of her fear that others would think she was crazy. And that's something that we need to work on globally. When I first got the call about Gabby overdosing, I felt numb. She was like family to me. The relationship Gabby and I had, we were soulmates. We just understood each other, and when we were together, we never talked about the bad things going on in our lives. And I think, well, now I know that we should have. I didn't think that I would have to be in a world where I missed her. I definitely took our friendship for granted, and I didn't keep in contact with her as much as I should have. We need to get rid of the stigma that people with mental illness and drug addiction are feared by society. We need to help and be there for our loved ones, because I can guarantee that you don't want to wake up in a world every day without your best friend.
She lost it in a haze of gray.